The wagon was supposed to arrive before sundown. By the time the moon climbed over the ridge and the road stayed empty, Caleb Hart knew something was wrong. He stood on the porch of his cabin, lantern hanging useless in his hand, staring down the dirt road that led nowhere fast. He had waited 5 years to send that letter. 5 years of loneliness after burying his parents, 5 winters talking to nothing but cattle and wind. When he finally sent for a mail-order bride, he'd promised himself one thing. If she didn't come, he'd accept it. But she had written back. Her handwriting had been careful, slanted slightly to the right. She said she was afraid but willing. She said her name was Eliza Moore. She said she'd be on the wagon coming west before winter deepened. Caleb waited 2 more days. On the 3rd morning, he saddled his horse. He didn't tell himself he was rescuing anyone. He told himself he was just looking. But he followed the wagon road the way a man follows a prayer he's afraid to say out loud. 10 miles out, he found the first sign. A broken crate, splintered wood half buried in mud. Another mile, fabric caught on thorn bushes, pale blue, torn. Caleb's chest tightened. The wreckage lay in a ravine where the road narrowed and the ground gave way. The wagon had rolled, shattered against stone. One wheel was completely gone, supplies scattered, no bodies in sight. Too quiet. Eliza, he called, voice echoing uselessly. He followed a trail, drag marks, faint footprints leading toward the trees. Someone had crawled, someone hurt. He found her near the creek, barely conscious, one leg pinned under a fallen branch. Her dress was ripped, her face bruised, lips cracked from thirst. When he knelt beside her, her eyes fluttered open. "You're late," she whispered, trying to smile. Caleb swallowed hard. "I'm here now." She tried to sit up and cried out, collapsing back into the dirt. "Don't," he said gently, "don't move." "I thought you wouldn't come," she breathed. "I thought maybe God changed his mind." Caleb slid his coat under her head, hands shaking despite years of hard work. God didn't change anything. The road just got rough. He lifted her carefully, like she might break apart if he breathed wrong. She was lighter than she should have been. Bandits had come after the crash. She told him in pieces. They'd taken what they wanted and left her when she couldn't walk anymore. "I stayed awake," she whispered against his shoulder, "because I thought if I slept I wouldn't wake up." "You don't have to be strong anymore," Caleb said. "I've got you." The ride back was slow. Every step of the horse felt like a risk. Eliza faded in and out, fingers gripping his shirt like an anchor. When they reached the cabin, Caleb carried her inside, laid her on his own bed without hesitation, and built the fire higher than he ever had before. Days passed. Then more. Eliza's leg was broken, ribs bruised, spirit battered but not gone. She apologized too much, thanked him too often, tried to sit up before she should. "You don't owe me anything," Caleb told her one night as he changed the bandage. "You were already coming here. I just finished the road." She studied him, eyes clearer now. "You could have turned back." "So could you," he said. "You didn't." Snow fell early that year. Eliza learned the cabin slowly. From the window she could watch the horses, from the table where she stitched torn clothes back together with careful patience. She never assumed she belonged, never touched anything without asking. Caleb noticed everything. How she listened before speaking, how she flinched at raised voices, how she sat by the fire at night like she was afraid it might disappear. One evening, she spoke the fear she'd been holding. "If you don't want to marry me anymore," she said quietly, "I understand, after everything." Caleb set down his cup. "I didn't send for perfection," he said. "I sent for a person." She looked at him then, really looked, and something in her eyes finally rested. Winter trapped them together, not as strangers, not yet as husband and wife, just 2 people learning how to exist in the same quiet without fear. And one night, As the wind howled outside and the cabin stood firm against it, Eliza whispered the truth that changed everything. "I didn't survive that crash because I was strong." Caleb looked at her. "I survived because I believed someone was coming." He reached for her hand, not to claim, not to rush, but to promise without words. This time he wouldn't be late. The storm that night was the worst of the season. Wind slammed against the cabin like it meant to tear it apart plank by plank, and snow packed itself against the door until the world outside vanished completely. Caleb fed the fire until his arms ached, refusing to let the cold creep any closer than the walls. Eliza woke crying out just past midnight. Not loud, just a broken sound like breath catching on old fear. Caleb was at her side instantly. "Easy," he said, lowering himself beside the bed. "You're safe." Her hands clutched the blanket, eyes unfocused. "They came back," she whispered. "The wagon, I can't move." Caleb didn't touch her right away. He remembered what fear could do when it was cornered. "It's just the wind," he said calmly. "Listen to me." She shook her head, tears slipping free. "Don't leave." "I'm not going anywhere." Slowly he offered his hand, not grabbing, just there. After a moment she took it, fingers trembling. "Breathe with me," he said. "In, out." Her breaths matched his, uneven at first, then steadier. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I keep breaking." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You're healing," he said. "There's a difference." By morning, the storm had buried the world in white. The door wouldn't open more than a few inches. "We're snowed in," Caleb said, surveying the drift. Eliza managed a small smile. "Then I suppose you're stuck with me." "I don't mind," he replied, and meant it. The days that followed were quiet in a way that felt earned. Eliza began walking again with a cane Caleb carved himself, every step hard one. She insisted on helping where she could, shelling beans, mending gloves, reading aloud from the one book she'd brought with her. One afternoon, she paused mid-sentence. "Why did you choose me?" she asked. Caleb leaned back in his chair. "You wrote that you weren't looking for rescue, just a place to belong." She swallowed. "I was afraid no one would answer." "I did," he said simply. When spring finally broke the snow, the world looked new again. The road reappeared. The trees budded. Eliza stood on the porch for a long time, breathing in the air like it was proof she'd survived. "You could still go," Caleb said gently, "if you want to." She turned to him, eyes steady now. "I didn't come all this way to leave." He nodded, something in his chest easing. The wedding wasn't planned. It just happened. A neighbor rode out with a preacher one clear afternoon. Eliza wore a simple dress she'd mended herself. Caleb wore his father's coat. They stood under the open sky, no grand words, no promises shouted. Just two people choosing each other. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, Eliza rested her head against Caleb's shoulder. "I used to think love was something loud," she said, "something that demanded." Caleb kissed the top of her head, careful and certain. "Turns out it's just someone who stays." She smiled, eyes closing, finally at peace. And far from the ravine where her wagon had broken, far from the road that almost ended her, Eliza understood something simple and true. She hadn't been found barely alive. She had been found exactly in time. Life after that didn't suddenly become easy. It became shared, and that made all the difference. Summer came strong and honest. Eliza learned the rhythm of the ranch the way one learns a language, slowly at first, then without thinking. She rose early, though Caleb never asked it of her. She learned which horses startled easily, which cattle wandered, which fields needed more care than others. She still limped on cold mornings, but she never complained. Caleb noticed the quiet ways she changed the place. Flowers appeared near the porch where there had only been dirt. The cabin smelled warmer, lived in. Laughter, real laughter, found its way back into the walls, tentative at first, then sure. One afternoon, Caleb returned from the far pasture to find Eliza sitting on the floor, papers spread around her. "What's all this?" he asked. She looked up a little embarrassed. "Accounts. I'm not very good at numbers, but I thought maybe I could help keep things straight." Caleb knelt beside her. "You already help." "I want to belong," she said softly, "not just stay." He reached for her hand, then stopped asking. That fall, trouble came riding in with dust and bad intentions. Two men from the ravine, survivors of the bandit group, recognized Eliza in town. They followed her home one evening, careless and cruel enough to think the past still owned her. They didn't make it past the fence. Caleb stood his ground without shouting, without violence, but with a presence that made it clear this land was no longer a place for unfinished cruelty. Word spread fast. The men left. They never came back. That night, Eliza shook harder than she wanted to admit. "They still know my name," she whispered. Caleb wrapped his arms around her, firm and unyielding. "Then they'll also know mine." Winter returned, gentler this time. They shared stories by the fire, hers of the life she'd fled, his of the family he'd buried. Some stories hurt, some healed. All were told without fear. One evening, Eliza rested her hand over Caleb's heart. "It's strange," she said. "I survived so much, but this is the part that scares me." "What part?" "Being happy," she admitted, "because now I have something to lose." Caleb kissed her knuckles. "We lose things anyway," he said. "Might as well live while we can." Years passed. Neighbors stopped calling her the mail-order bride. She was simply Eliza Hart, the woman who helped deliver Bobbies, who stayed through sickness, who stood steady when storms came. Children trusted her. Men respected her. One spring morning, as sunlight spilled through the cabin window, Eliza placed Caleb's hand on her belly. He froze. "Are you?" She nodded, tears shining. "Barely believed it myself." Caleb laughed once, broken and full. Then he held her like the world had finally kept its promise. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sky turned gold and the land stretched endless and forgiving, Caleb would look out toward the distant road where the wagon had once broken. Not with fear, but with gratitude, because the journey that almost ended there had led them exactly where they were meant to be. The news changed the way Caleb looked at the world. He began to notice small things with a new kind of care. The way Eliza tired more easily in the afternoons, the way she paused before standing, the way her hand rested protectively over her belly even when she thought no one was watching. He didn't hover, but he stayed close, like the land itself had taught him to. Eliza carried the child quietly, no grand announcements, just steady days and careful hope. The town found out the way towns always do, through glances, through smiles held a second too long. Some women brought cloth. One left a basket of apples at the door without a name. Another offered a cradle her own children had outgrown. Eliza accepted kindness slowly, still learning it didn't come with a price. As summer leaned toward fall, her strength faded. The old injury in her leg flared, and by evening she sometimes leaned heavily on the doorframe, breath shallow. "You need rest," Caleb said one night, worry etched deep. "I've rested my whole life waiting," she replied gently. "Now I want to live it." When the pains began, it wasn't dramatic. Just a quiet tightening, like the body clearing its throat. Caleb rode hard through the night for the midwife, heart pounding louder than the hooves. By the time he returned, Eliza was calm but pale, eyes bright with something between fear and awe. "You came back," she whispered. "I always will." The labor was long, longer than anyone expected. Eliza cried out once, just once, then clamped down on the sound like she had learned to do long ago. The midwife scolded her gently for it. "You don't have to be brave anymore," she said. "Let it out." Eliza met Caleb's eyes. He nodded, tears sliding freely now. She screamed then, not in fear but in release. And before dawn, as the first light crept across the fields, the child arrived. A daughter. Small, perfect, furious at the world for daring to pull her into it. Caleb held her with shaking hands, afraid of his own breath. Eliza watched, exhausted and radiant. "She looks like you," he whispered. "She has your stubbornness," Eliza replied, smiling weakly. They named her Hope. Not because it sounded pretty, but because it was the truest word they knew. The years after were full in ways Caleb had never imagined. The ranch echoed with new sounds, footsteps running, laughter carried on the wind, questions asked at the worst possible moments. Hope grew strong, curious, fearless. She learned to walk in the dirt, to ride before she could read, to listen before she spoke, just like her parents. One evening, as Caleb repaired a fence, Hope sat beside him, legs swinging. "Mama says you found her," she said seriously. Caleb shook his head. "No, we found each other." Hope considered this. "Did you almost miss her?" "Yes," he admitted. She frowned. "That's sad." "It is," he said, "but we didn't." Hope smiled then, satisfied. "Good." Years later, long after the pain had faded into memory, Eliza stood with Caleb at the edge of the ravine where it had all begun. Grass grew thick now. No sign of the crash remained. "I used to think this place was where my life nearly ended," she said softly. Caleb took her hand, "And now?" She leaned into him, steady and sure. "Now it's just the place where everything started." They turned back toward the ranch, where smoke rose gently from the chimney, where laughter waited, where the road no longer meant fear. And behind them the ravine stayed silent. No longer a wound. Just a chapter. Finally closed.